So our newest member of the budget committee is Amy Paul. So Amy is a result of the CLA program, and she applied for the budget committee only, I believe, right? Which I commended. Yeah, that was the only one she wanted. So love that. Um, it does. We all the numbers people are weird. Yeah. So yeah, did you want to speak a little bit more about yourself, or you don't have to? Yeah. What about the rest? We can do a little brief introduction. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I think you applied like just right after you moved here, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. I think this is four. Well, it's all material. It's materiality, so it's three or four. It's fine. It's close enough. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And Mayor Letts, welcome. You're fine here. Did you want a budget book for? It's just the current year. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. And then we have Monica Burmeister. She's our city recorders here. She put all this together, so thank you for doing that. Kim Keaton, our accounting analyst, jack of all trades, master of all trades. Would you? She's kind of our anchor in the finance department. Does a whole lot for us. And then, of course, Carrie Prosser, assistant city manager. And likewise, they're both accountants at heart, I think. Right? So again, yeah, thank you all for coming here. So this is, I just wanted this to kind of be an open-ended, like a training, right? And this is something that we kind of offer up to any new counselors or budget committee members, or really any board member, or really any community member, I guess, for that matter, just to kind of get familiar with the city's budget. And I think that it seems to me, and I think I've got a little bit of feedback from you all as well, that it's not always clear what the budget committee's role is. And I think that during the budget committee meetings, you know, we try to make it kind of an efficient process, if you will. So I feel like there's not always that opportunity to kind of ask maybe general questions, even though you're more than welcome to. It just sometimes seems like it might be kind of an offhanded time to do that. So I just wanted to make sure that the budget committee, counselors, community had the opportunity to kind of ask any questions about any line items, any transfers, processes, funds, departments, anything related to the budget in more of an informal meeting. So, you know, that's why we're kind of presenting this to you all. And I think that, again, it can be very open-ended. So I've got kind of a rough outline of what we can cover. I think are what are some of the things that are a little bit more of a head scratcher compared to maybe the private industry. And I think that are maybe a little bit more difficult to kind of grasp if you're not familiar with them. And so we can cover those things here, and then maybe cover anything that you all would want to talk about. So, and if there is anything, we can, you know, please feel free to interject as kind of we go along. Yeah. So with that, I guess just to kind of kick it off, you know, the budget committee's overall role, and I think Doug, you and I have gone over this quite a bit over the years, and I think that it is kind of it's an interesting space because you have staff, which obviously is very familiar with city operations. You have the city council, who's obviously very familiar with city operations, and you have the budget committee, who's maybe not as much familiar because we meet once a year. And so, you know, ultimately the budget committee is there to approve the budget, number one, but number two, just to be the eyes and ears of the community, right? That's why the city council appoints you. That's why you're participating, just to be another check balance in the system. So instead of just 5 counselors, you can have, you know, 5 more in the budget committee for a total of 10. So if something was really haywire in terms of what the budget committee perceives, then they could not approve the budget. So, you know, that ultimately is kind of the role of the budget committee. Oh, yeah.
As just a reminder.
Oh, yeah.
And this red light goes on.
So, I mean, is that suitable? I mean, and I think that, you know, it is tricky because a lot of these, like you have a lot of policy, a lot of goals are already kind of baked into the budget. But of course, you know, any comments or any feedback from the budget committee is welcome.
I'd like to add to that a little bit, which is there's no dumb questions, right? I mean, a question is just the search for an answer, so don't feel like there's a dumb one. I mean, I ask them all the time at council level, so don't worry.
Yeah. And this doesn't show, this is a 2-pager. I think it's on page in your book there, it would be page 35 and 36. So.
See, we've done 35 pages already.
Right, just skipping on through. So the city has 12 funds, and by far the most complicated and complex fund is the general fund. And the general fund, that's where the property taxes go in. That is where several other line items go into that really aren't assigned a separate fund, such as the street fund, which has franchise fees, gas tax, things like that. So I think that's probably the most difficult fund to understand. And one of the reasons is because of all the departments. It's got 8 departments in it. And by departments, you have, you know, kind of a separate entity within the general fund. So you have, you know, the city council manager has their fund, and that house is like, we can go and take a look at it real quick. So in terms of line items, that has, oh, I'm sorry, we're on page 42. So let's take a look at a snapshot of that. You have, you know, your payroll allocation for that. So, you know, every personnel here is allocated in certain areas of the budget. In the general fund, you're going to have the city manager, assistant city manager, city recorder, their a lot of their salaries and wages are going to be allocated to this fund. And you have a lot of, excuse me, a lot of kind of unique things. We have, community services grant. That is a grant program that the city council votes on, and communities, different organizations apply for grants throughout the community and ask for funds, and the council basically awards that. So that would be in this department. You have like meetings and workshops, things like that. And so we try, there's a couple oddballs in there, oddballs and kind of the uniqueness of the frequency of the transaction. You have a loan to the URA, which we can cover in detail a little bit later. But obviously some stuff that's more focused towards, the city council function. There's a lot of things in here, telephones, cell phones. Those are also kind of allocated expenditures, if you will. So those get allocated to every department and every fund, with the exception of the Urban Renewal Agency. Good question. Those are the only two programs in terms of like where those forgivable loans go. Yeah. So before 2019, we had a kind of a separate department that showed where all these kind of grant programs would come out of. And there was a decision that was made at the time to kind of dissolve that. Because it wasn't used very much, but then you have to find a home for some of these programs, and that's where we ended up putting it. So affordable housing program, we have a workforce housing program, but that's actually in the urban renewal area, and not council manager. So I guess just to back up a little bit as well. So the other confusing thing about the general fund is kind of the lack of assignment of revenue. So in other words, no department is receiving their share of all the property tax. We don't usually allocate it as such, and that's why in this breakdown you don't see any revenue getting specifically assigned to the council manager department. But we do have some departments that have revenue. So parks is a great example. So we have a couple of functions in our parks that generate revenue. One of them is our campground right here, Creekside Campground. The Creekside Campground makes about $360,000 a year, which is amazing. And we have event fees too that also go into the parks program. So we try to do the best we can to assign revenue line items into each department, but obviously that's not an exact science. One other thing that we tried to emphasize is law enforcement here. Law enforcement, it might be kind of concise in terms of amount of line items, but obviously the contract is huge. And that is kind of supplemented largely by the transit lodging tax, which is over $1 million a year. So that's one of the things that we've kind of, I guess, informally assigned to the law enforcement here in town. So that's kind of the way the departments go through in the general fund. Does anybody have any questions about those, or would like to look at any departments more in detail, or have any comments about that? I think that's probably the most difficult thing to understand. It'd be a lot easier if, each department had their own, assigned revenue, but they just don't. Go ahead. You can just leave it on too. Oh, it's on now.
Or now it's on, okay. Didn't turn red. Has it always been that way, or was there a time, like, is this a historical fact, or why?
I mean, it's always been that way, and I think most all municipalities conduct their budgets if they have that many departments within the general fund that way. The only thing you can kind of do a little differently is you can show transfers, I think, in and out of general revenue line items, but I think that I don't think that makes things that much more clear. So what we try to do in each department is kind of show the subsidy that the overall general fund is giving to that department.
Amy, can you please talk into your microphone? This is being recorded, and although we can hear you in the room, make sure you get kind of close to it for the
How's that?
video record.
We're probably going to get at least a couple 100,000 hits on the stream, don't you think? So one of the other things I thought about was, in the budget process, we cover a lot of major revenue sources, obviously property tax, and this I'm just talking about the general fund for now. Property tax we cover a lot in here. We cover the campground fees. We cover state revenue sharing. So for liquor, cigarette tax, we get a portion of that, depending on our size. So those are called shared revenue line items. Our transit lodging tax is in there, but we don't typically discuss a lot of these other income line items. And so I'm not sure about you all, but sometimes I feel like we kind of stream through the general fund revenue and don't touch on a lot of these things that are in here, and maybe there's some curiosity as to what they are.
That's page 38, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll do a better job of pointing out. Yeah, page 38. And so just to kind of go down here, some of the things that maybe kind of make sense and maybe kind of don't make sense, licensing fees. So those are largely business licenses, right? We kind of roll down here. And above that is called internal services. Now, internal services is kind of a charge and a term that a lot of cities use. And what that is the water and the street and the sewer fund kind of paying a service charge to the general fund. Now, as you saw in some of the other departments, like cell phones, copier, a lot of those insurance, a lot of those things get allocated amongst the department, but not everything. So, we try to account for a lot of those non-allocated expenditures through the internal services. And a little bit of the payroll too, I guess. But usually they consist of like bank fees, payroll fees. We pay a little bit of property taxes for property in town that's not occupied by city employees and have more of a private, a private practice goal in them. Cell towers come to mind, I guess. We have planning fees. So those are the fees that our planning department incurs upon, development review, things like that. Event fees, we looked at that already with parks, actually. Advanced planning fee, so that's actually a percentage of the building permit cost. So we get, I think it's 0.029% of the building cost we get for the planning department. There's Justice Court. Justice Court is for a lot of the tickets that we get in town. This went up dramatically after we renegotiated a law enforcement contract back in 2020. I think it was in 2020. Close enough, right? There's another one that we don't talk a lot about either, which has actually become quite a decent size revenue line item, and that's cell towers. So the city has 2 cell tower sites in town. We have one at First Street Park, and it's actually easy to miss. It's brown. It's not very tall. It's probably maybe 40 feet tall. And then we have another one at our Public Works headquarters. And so both of those, the operators of those towers pay us for rent, basically. And then if they ever get like a co-locate, so if it's like a T-Mobile tower and they put an AT&T locate on there, then we get like an extra $400 or whatever the agreement is per month. So it's kind of it's almost like a little bit of rental income, which is a nice little add to the general fund revenue. So that's, the most of the, the kind of unique revenue line items that we really don't touch on maybe specifically in the budget meetings.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Cigarette tax. What is the cigarette tax? What's percentage of, what is it, percentage of?
It's based on a per capita. Mm-hmm. So the state basically takes all of the income from cigarette tax. I think they take an administrative fee from that, and then they allocate it to all cities based on a per capita basis.
Okay. That's why I was just checking
and it's obviously going down quite a bit.
I think people are smoking less, so.
Yeah, it's a shame. But
Liquor tax is
it
going
is.
down too, and I'm trying as hard as I can on that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, but it benefits you when you have the smoke in the air. It doesn't affect you as much.
Right.
You know?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask about the advanced planning fee? That one went down quite a bit from 2022.
Yep. Good observation. So the advanced planning fee really changes based on commercial development, I will say, really drives that number kind of haywire. So you can get a commercial building that's maybe valued at $5 or $6 million, and that translates to a huge advanced planning fee. Or if you have a big development, I think that was at the tail end of maybe Mackenzie Meadow, coupled with a couple larger buildings. I think those were actually the layered buildings in town. Yep, just kind of off Sun Ranch there. That can kind of skyrocket that number. So it's a really difficult number to put a pin on. And it's kind of all over the place. So, in terms of residential development, you can kind of back into, how much do we have left for new development? How much do we have left for infill, including commercial development? But it's still difficult to hit the timing just right on those. So that's probably the main reason why it's all over the place. Another one there that I didn't touch on before was property rentals. So that is for the First Street, or the Main Street building, excuse me, previously where the chamber was, and then the Maida Beta building where the Sisters Historical Society currently is. Okay. And then, let's see, we don't have to touch on those. That was wow. Any other questions about the general fund or anything else? I was going to go hit on some other funds. Any other things that are top of mind for anybody? Okay. Oh, good question. So the transit grant, so we have, that's that grant with COIC. So we have the Cascade East Transit transportation program through town. And so the city pays, most of that service is matched. So that $31,000 comes into the city, then it goes out. It's actually in the community development department for about $33,000. So the city pays about $2,000 for the transit services within the city. And that's a contract. It's kind of funky, but we have that. We're kind of the subrecipient of that. COIC, or Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, runs the program with ODOT, and we're kind of just the subrecipient of that. So then any other grants that we get through the general fund, this $550,000, that was from the county. That was for affordable housing. That's where our ARPA dollars came in after COVID. So there's a lot of different things that typically go in there. And then if you go through each department, it kind of shows you where their kind of assigned grants are. So like I said before, that 5310 grant comes through the community development department. And if you were to scroll down the community development department, it would be there, hopefully. No, it's there. Right there. Okay, any other questions about general fund? Is there? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, can you talk about the reserves and what that is?
Yeah. That was kind of on my agenda here to go through. The reserves. So if you want to talk about how, and I'll tell you what page I'm on as soon as I find it here.
If you're going to touch on it later, you can wait.
No. This is a good time to do it.
I was looking at the pie chart, and it's like, oh, $4 million in reserves. What is that?
Okay, so I'm on page 59. Here for a minute. So the reserves are probably, I would say, the most nuanced thing to understand, especially going from how it relates to a private company's analysis of financial statements to a municipality's. And I think the biggest thing to compare it to is like retained earnings, right? Or capital account or something like that for any private business, kind of like a carryover. And so what happens is we, put in all of our expenses. We have our personnel services, we have all of these expenditures within the general fund, and that has a certain number. But we also have a couple other numbers that are calculated through here. So the first one here, as you can see on page 59, is operating contingency. Now, if you remember that, it does go over contingencies in kind of the narrative of this, but contingencies, statewide and for the city are composed of 2 months of operating expenditures. And so that's what that 1,100,000. So that is a formula that is set. So you start there, you have that, and then you kind of work your way down here to some other kind of, I would say, fixed reserves, so to speak. And another interesting one to understand is the capital replacement reserve. So this was kind of thought of back in 2014, maybe 2013. A lot of other cities have like a reserve fund, a reserve department. And the purpose of that is to basically kind of prepay for any improvements that need to be done. So the roof on City Hall, if it's a 20-year roof and you need, X amount of dollars, you're going to set aside those dollars every year to kind of prepay for that roof, right? The same goes for a vehicle, one of the city vehicles. It could be a number of those things. So we try to be thoughtful about large upcoming expenditures as to not have those be kind of surprises and hit the general fund especially or any other fund kind of adversely. So we're trying to be thoughtful about how we pay for those things, because otherwise you could have let's say replace the roof here is $200,000. You could have a $200,000 expense here and maybe not even have the money for it. So it's trying to be thoughtful about prepaying for all of those. And like I said before, so each fund, most of the funds have that already baked in to their fund activity. So does that make sense? It's basically a prepayment for replacement assets.
And how does that compare to the rainy day fund and what you can use it for? So
Great question.
if you had a capital expense that was more than your reserve, could you then dip into the rainy day fund, or what else?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that's a great question. A little bit of flexibility there. The one thing about the replacement reserve, you're right, is, as we look at that, some of those numbers, if we're to year 19 of a 20-year replacement reserve, and that was $200,000, and you think, oh my gosh, that is now $400,000. Maybe you have to do what you're talking about and dip into more of that reserve, or you wipe out the reserve and the expenditure line item is more than you projected, so there's a chance that you might have to dip into another reserve line item. Obviously for budget purposes that can't be negative, so you'd have to be a little more thoughtful. You'd probably grab it from contingency or something. But so that's a really good point. So the rainy day fund was also created around that same, maybe that 2017, 2018 timeline. And that was when some of these contracts, for instance, like a law enforcement contract, was $700,000 or so at that time. And I guess when you have relatively volatile revenue streams such as lodging tax, park fees, to name two, which are over $1.5 million, which is almost your tax increment. You have like a COVID, you have a smoky season, you have some kind of catastrophic event that runs those numbers down to a very low number, then you're going to have to still be obligated to pay for those contracts in some way, shape, or form. So that was our way of kind of accounting for that change in the economy. And during COVID, we saw that. I've mentioned this a little bit in prior meetings, but we had some of our partners in other parts of the state that had really relied heavily on transient lodging tax. And when COVID happened, or when some of the fires happened back then, those numbers were significantly affected, and they were scrambling for short-term borrowing. What do we do in order to, make make everything square in terms of the budget. And so we kind of learned that maybe we should be a little more thoughtful about how we plan for the fact that those revenues might not always be there. So that's how we kind of came up with that. And if you kind of back into it, it's a little bit of, like I said, the larger contracts. You have the law enforcement contract, you have Explore Sisters, which is our marketing organization, and you have Explore Sisters, which is Economic Development for Central Oregon, or EDCO. So if you put those together for 1 year, it's about that. And then
We haven't dipped into the rainy day fund since I've been on council that I know of.
no, and it's been growing, obviously.
How is it funded?
So, and that's where it's funded, fortunately enough, through the kind of the excess that the general fund has, right? So again, compared to like a retained earnings or kind of like an excess that any other company would have, that's how it's kind of funded.
So any excess just goes into the rainy day fund?
Right. Part of that, yep. And we'll make our way up there, and I'll
Okay.
show you a little bit more detail of where it goes, but you're totally right. That's part of it. Well, and part of it is, you don't want to, your excess of fund balance, you don't always want to just throw a huge number there. It does help to be thoughtful about it. That way, it's not always just thought of as something that can just be spent down and, see you later. So we're trying to be thoughtful about the reserves, I guess. And another one of those is our law enforcement reserve. So this goes back to kind of the origination of the law enforcement contract back in 2019, 2020. And there was the possibility of going to that contract, for you who don't know, have 3 deputies and 1 lieutenant, or 2/3 of a lieutenant. There was a thought that we would want to at some point go to a 4th deputy. And so we thought that we could set aside some funds in the short term to create a reserve for that. So the reserve is more or less adding 1 deputy, and it's about $250,000 to add 1 for 1 year. And so that kind of represents that amount. And then housing reserve is the next one up here, 20,000. That was not an arbitrary number, but I think a number that council wanted to just have as a placeholder, kind of pursuant to some of their goals in the event that we needed to support, an additional housing effort. So going above that is the affordable housing reserve. That is another one that's kind of tricky to figure out. So the lodging tax in the city is 8.99%. And it used to be 8%. And of that 8%, the city gets more or less 70% of that, and 30% of that goes to tourism promotion. And then in 2016, we added another 0.99% to the 8.99, to the 8. So it was 8.99 total, right? But legislation says if you add any new tax, that actually needs to be divided up 70% for destination marketing, and 30% is discretionary. So it's kind of flipped. So council decided at the time to make that 30% discretionary for affordable housing. So every year, you do the math, every year about $33,000 to $35,000 goes toward affordable housing reserve. So that affordable housing, you can see that number is huge, and you're going to ask why. I'll tell you in a second. That affordable housing reserve has grown by about that amount, or any developer contribution over the years. I think there's been 2 of those. And then this one particularly has that $500,000 that we saw up in grants from the county, and that is going towards the Northwest Housing Alternatives Affordable Housing Project off Trinity Way that just kicked off. That is 40 units?
Yeah.
Yep. So that will likely go away this next budget year. In addition to that, let's see. Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the main reasons why that number's what it is. So obviously that number builds up over time, and then that will go down. You'll see in the upcoming budget that will be decreased dramatically by that, and another housing grant that's going to go out. So you come up, so again, those are all kind of scientifically calculated somewhat, and then you come up with the rest, right? And that is what really represents that $1.1 million. So that is kind of to make everything balance, so to speak. So again, if you were in a private company, that would probably be, your expected net income, right? That would roll in as retained earnings for next year.
Is there an upper limit that you have on the reserves before you would say we actually need to start spending this and allocating this?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, there is.
Anywhere near it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what that exact number is, but yeah, you're right. I mean, at some point, you have to say to yourself, hey, what is an amount that we're comfortable with doing a one-time investment? Maybe it's property acquisition, maybe it's something to do with affordable housing, another effort. And then the idea is committing to that one expenditure and maybe not committing to a lot of ongoing expenditures because you don't know how long that's going to last. You want to?
So the one thing I would caution about reserves, especially for sisters, is that this reflects a very good position for the city to be in. One of the major reasons is because of all the growth. Post-COVID, post-recession, sisters, you guys all experienced it, boomed, right? And so if you go back historically, even prior to the last couple fiscal years, that number did grow, and we were able to do things like set up the rainy day fund, which Bend has something very similar. They call it a revenue stabilization fund. And basically, the impacts to Central Oregon, if there is a recession, are so dire because of the construction industry that you want to have a reserve that can help the city weather the storm, right? Whether that's building and planning services or police services, you don't want to have to do drastic cuts during a rainy day. So the rainy day fund was really able to be built up through massive amount of growth, not just in property development and new property taxes, but TLT grew
Oh, double.
200,000, 300,000 overnight because of the pandemic and kind of the rediscovery of Central Oregon after the recession. And then, we're going to travel locally instead of getting on an airplane, and it's kind of maintained at that level. So my caution is that this is not going to last forever. I think when we present the budget, my plan is to kind of do a little bit more forecasting with the budget committee to kind of show the future, if playing through a couple different scenarios. So during good times, like Sisters has had for the last 5 years, you build up these reserves because you know another rainy day is coming or growth slows. We're built out, we're expanding our UGB, we're probably 4 or 5 years away from seeing property values come online from new development in the urban growth boundaries. So, this picture of, we keep adding to our reserves is not going to be sustained. It just, no city can do that just because of the cycle of, how the economy works and growth and development works. So, to repeat what Joe said, the operating contingency, the reserves for future expenditures have a policy requirement where we look at how much it costs for personnel services and materials and services, our ongoing operations, and we want to cover 3 months at a minimum in those line items. That gives us a really healthy reserve. And what a really healthy reserve policy does for you is when we do need to go out and borrow money from the bond market to do something like build a new city hall or build a road project, we get rated, right? And one of the things they look at is what's your tax base, what's the valuation of your city. Oh, you have a 50% in reserves. Oh, wow. We're AA.
Yeah.
What are we, AA plus?
Plus.
We're not quite big enough to get to that AAA yet. You kind of need a bigger tax base to really have that much confidence from the rating agencies, but it certainly does help, right? And that gives you better interest rates and things like that. So the GOFA, the Government Finance Officer Association.
Got it. Yeah.
Their recommendation is 17%, I think, for an operating contingency. So we're above that. And our job, Joe, mine, staff, council, is to try to maintain that policy minimum so we don't have to dip into that. Where you can dip is when we do have a rainy day or we do need a revenue stabilization to keep operations going. and then some of these other reserves are planned to be spent. Like Joe said, the affordable housing is there to spend it. The law enforcement is sort of our backup, knowing that someday we'll probably need to eat into that to pay for our police contract. And then capital will someday be for capital, right? So that number will just naturally decline. Yeah. But it will slowly also in the policy minimum areas like the reserve for future and operating contingency naturally go up as your operating costs go up, like personnel and materials.
Yep.
Do any of these have different mechanisms or rules around how council can decide to spend them? Or are they kind of have to go through the same process? Or are we even involved in that, or is that more staff decisions?
No, absolutely. I mean, even the budget committee can provide some advice on policy minimums and financial policies. These are adopted financial policies. They're based off of best practices, but they are not restricted in the sense of like you would have in the utility funds, where those are restricted system development charges or gas taxes and things like that that are restricted for those purposes. The council can say, you know what? We don't think it's going to rain anymore in Sisters. Let's go build a park with that $1.5 million. There wouldn't be anything that would legally prevent you from spending general revenue dollars on that. The housing is a different story because it's tourism dollars, TLT, ARPA dollars. But the operating contingency, for example, is something that is there for, unforeseen circumstances. Something comes up. Hey, the community really wants this. Well, let's spend some of our contingency because we didn't plan on that, and let's pull it out of there and put it into a line item.
Well, it's a good point, because that's also where the caution comes in, because if you're going to invest in something maybe on a one-time basis, you don't know what you're committing with down the road. So, let's go buy, X lot or what have you. Are you still committing to another $100,000 of an expenditure from year to year? So I think that's the other part of that is cautionary. Council or budget committee could say, no, we need to invest this in something then. I mean, that's fine, but then what are you also committing to from year to year? Do you now need another employee that needs to maintain that? Do you need, more insurance, or what's the programming of it? So.
Yeah, and one of our metrics we're always monitoring, and we typically present when we present the budget, is what is that general revenue, the operating revenue, the property taxes, the state shared revenues, the TLT, what's that number compared to our ongoing costs, right? For our salaries and benefits, the police contract, how is that balanced? Because that number is going to tell you, your operating costs are going to go up, what is your operating revenue doing, and at what point do you start having to consider dipping into rainy day funds and reserves to pay for ongoing operations. We want to stay away from crossing that red line too much, right? So yeah, one time look at the rainy day fund and reserves as if you have to try to pull them for one-time purposes, not something like let's go hire 3 staff to do whatever that you're now committed to having this ongoing cost for many years without an ongoing revenue source.
I think there's a segment of the community that thinks that council just spends money on whatever we want, as much as we want, but I think the budget numbers show that historically, especially the last 10, 15 years, councils have been very cautionary and have allowed staff, especially finance department and leadership, to kind of guide us on those, good practices and a lot of those things. We wouldn't have all this reserve money if it wasn't for everybody working together, for sure.
For perspective, I think, what did we hear last fall? Like something like 2/3 of the cities in Oregon are fiscally on a cliff or running in the red. Like it's a astonishingly large number. So I feel, very proud of the work that we're doing, and everybody in this room and beyond, to be in this position, because we're in the minority, unfortunately, in the state.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, and usually when you ask those cities that are in trouble, do you have a fire department? Maybe, probably. Do you have a police department? Probably. So it's a lot of these, we've been to the benefit of growth and the popularity of Sisters, no question. we've tried to control our expenses as best we can, but we also are, I think, very thoughtful about these big decisions that we've had to made. You know, when we were reevaluating law enforcement coverage in the city, there was the idea of having, you know, a police department, and the sticker on that is huge. And it's not just your patrol officers, it's obviously facilities, and you're hiring probably more people to take care of, you know, your insurance, your risk management. I mean, it's just a snowball of things. So we've been really thoughtful about how we commit to some of these larger contracts and services throughout the city. Okay, is there anything, I was going to jump, we've got about 15 minutes or more. We can take as much time as we want. Anything anybody else wants to focus on? I was thinking about touching on URA a little bit. You think that's maybe worthwhile?
I think it's always good to touch on because it's a little complicated.
Yeah, I'm glad Jordan's here.
And-
He can explain this a lot better than I can. So the URA, or Urban Renewal Agency, is kind of thought of as a separate entity from the city. And the, oh, I'm sorry, gosh, 94.
We're almost done.
The dollar in the lack of page number shout out jar. So it's almost thought of as a separate entity. And the elected officials of the city also serve as board members of the Urban Renewal Agency, or URA. So the overall goal, and a lot of cities in Oregon have URAs, and probably throughout the country, I believe. And the goal of URAs, in its simplicity, is to identify an area, usually a blighted area, and have the overlapping districts of that area. So you have the city, you know, take an area on a map. You have the city, you have the fire district, you maybe have a police district, you have county, 911, library. All these are overlapping taxing districts on top of this area. They will basically freeze that tax base in a moment in time when the agency starts. And the idea is any excess tax increment, they call it. So anything above that frozen assessed value based. So if a property is worth $100 when it's frozen, it's worth $110 the next year. The URA gets that $10 of assessed value, or calculation of assessed value. So the goal is all these overlapping districts sacrifice this tax increment basically, and they all go into the URA. The URA's job is to typically go get financing and commence projects that will eventually enhance the area and encourage development in the area, right? So maybe like for us, for instance, we're doing Adams Avenue Streetscape project. It's a project that is kind of over an area that doesn't have a lot of development. Hopefully that will spur new development. And then after the agency is done, the thought is the encouragement of development will then kind of incur a larger assessed value. So all those overlapping districts in time will get a return on their investment. I mean, you're talking, 30, 40 years, so it's kind of the long game, but eventually all that property, because of the improvements, will be made more valuable and people will develop it and things like that. So.
And they'll pay more in taxes because of.
Yeah, and that's the return. Yeah, exactly. So those overlapping districts that have sacrificed those taxes for those years will get that in return. So that's kind of the overarching goal, I guess, of a URA. And so the cities started back in 2003, and it's a 27-year plan, so it ends in twilights, they call it 2030. And that 2030 timestamp is put there so the city, or the URA rather, cannot commence any new projects or incur any new debt after 2030. And so what the city's done, and what was in the goal for this particular budget, was to go out and get debt financing kind of for the rest of the projects in the list of the URA. And so those projects will be done, obviously, or commence at least before 2030. But the debt for those might be paid a little bit. You can pay debt after 2030. And ours probably won't be paid many years after, maybe 3 or 4.
You just can't incur new debt.
Just can't incur new debt or commence new projects.
Right.
So that's kind of the, I guess that's kind of the broad explanation of that. You know, so it's actually a really good tool to enhance a lot of areas of town. Our, you know, Adams Avenue, the north end of town, is going to look great. Hopefully it will encourage a lot of those property owners that haven't done much to do something with their property. Maybe it's sell it, because before then they would have to do a lot of frontage improvements if they were to develop it, and those are going to be done for them. So that is a URA in its simplicity. Did I leave any? Yeah.
Can you explain just for a second
Yeah.
about the boundaries of the URA as compared to
Yeah.
city limits?
Yeah. So I'm on page, oh yeah, get the mini page here. It's actually,
It's little.
this one is, so it's 98.
So the work of the URA has to occur within this boundary.
Yeah, so it's essentially the downtown core. So some of the URA funds we've used in the past, you know, now Gateway Park East Portal right here, that has just been recently kind of redeveloped by the city. That was in the URA. A little bit of the new roundabouts in the URA. A bunch of different, there's been projects on Cascade Avenue. And then you can see Adams up here is also in the URA. So yeah, that's just it's a nice broad area. And so yeah, I mean, I think over time, the city's been able to, the URA rather, has been able to do some creative things with it, for sure. But it does,
The governance of that the same as city, I mean, because it's overlapping districts that would have an interest, but it's wholly up to the city council to decide how to spend it?
that's right, yep. And so there are certain things that the overlapping districts do need input on. If you were to change the area at all, that you need their permission. You know, every time the report comes out on an annual basis, that needs to be sent to those overlapping districts. Yeah, so any major change, and there's a bunch of different definitions of that, need the permission of those overlapping districts. And obviously, when you start one of these, you need to get all of their permission as well. Because you're talking, you know, fire district, I think, sacrifices around maybe $100,000, a little over $100,000 a year. So does the city, in foregone tax. Otherwise, we would be receiving that. So, yeah, I mean, it's impactful for sure. School districts obviously are also in that overlapping district. They typically get reimbursed by the state, if I am not mistaken. So they don't have to forego that as much as some of the other districts do. And then the other kind of complicated thing about the URA, and Jordan and I talk about this a lot, but they have, the URA has two different funds. So they have a project fund, and now I'm on page, well, that's 103. I don't know if I want to be there or not, though. Yeah, sure, 103. So they have a debt service fund and they have a project fund. It'd be nice if it was just one fund in total, but that's just not how the statute is laid out for urban renewals. Probably because a lot of other cities have more complicated urban renewals. We don't, but it does get more complicated as you make more funds. So you can see there, here's the tax increment coming in, right? $550,000. And, you know, that's paying off debt. In this case, it's $600,000. So the debt side, you know, separately, they're actually fairly simple. But the way they interact with each other is probably more complicated than it needs to be. And I won't have to go through that exercise right now. Mostly because I've got, it's a really good diagram that Carrie came up with, and I don't have to pay her royalties. So I guess the next part of that is the project fund, and that is on page, we're on page 105. And that's kind of more of an action fund, if you will. So that's showing you right here is the capital outlay for largely Adams Avenue. A couple other projects in there. We had some other things with we had a pump station contribution. That was like a wastewater pump station that the URA contributed to. And then let's see, we had a little bit of URA roundabout art in that as well. And then, yeah, then it pays for a lot of its other things. We had technical assistance in here, and that was mainly for the borrowing. That typically is a decent I think it was, ended up being about $80,000 and not 170, but we weren't sure of that number, so that's why we kind of shot high on that one. And that is mainly for like, you have to pay the bond counsel when you go out and get lending as a municipality. You usually have to pay for the lending bond counsel and your own bond counsel, so they kind of get you on both ends of that. And then auditing services, and then administrative services. So that $30,000, so you think to yourself, URA, especially in the last couple of years, has actually taken a lot of staff time. And you'll notice in here, there's no personal services in the URA. And so what the URA does is basically pays the general fund administrative fee to kind of run the URA. So it's kind of it's almost like a contractor fee, if you will. Because, especially with Adams Avenue, that's going to take a lot of staff time. So you'll see that number change quite a bit in this upcoming budget as well, to a lot larger number than that.
And the one that doesn't have a name, I think I know what that is, but the 400,000 line item.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it doesn't have a name in there.
Give it a name.
Yeah, the line item with no name. That's workforce housing. And that
Okay.
was
Go ahead.
yeah, Habitat for Humanity contribution. Yeah. Great catch. Open-ended.
Yeah, sometimes people think of like the Urban Renewal Agency as like the slush fund, right? Like some pet projects and all that. The truth is, it is a great resource for local governments in Oregon to be able to use tax increment to basically pay for debt, right? For big projects that we otherwise couldn't do or would have to go and ask taxpayers directly to pass a bond, right? Like, probably wouldn't be that successful if we said, hey, public, do you want to increase your taxes a couple $100s a year for Adams Avenue? Because we need to do a $4 million project. But by creating this district, you freeze the base and then have that tax increment that then goes and pays for that debt. But the projects, you can't just spend it on anything, right? The projects are defined in an urban renewal plan that the governing body approves.
And there's a maximum to that, too.
Yeah, and there's a maximum of how much you can spend. So again, ours sunsets in 2030 in terms of new projects, and we can only, again, do projects that are on that list or in the urban renewal plan. So you can't spend it on things like staff, except for administrative services to actually carry out the projects. It's very much a capital project fund, right? You're doing street projects, you're doing park projects, you're doing other quality of life things to enhance the value of that urban renewal area. And most cities in Oregon define their urban renewal similar to sisters. It's your downtown, it may be an old commercial or industrial district, right? If you've ever been to Portland, that whole Pearl district, right? Was kind of like built off of urban renewal and it's very much that definition of curing blight of old industries and turning them into more vibrant neighborhoods. And I think it's been done pretty effectively here, because if you look at that map again, think of all the new development in downtown, the potential for additional development with some of those vacant lands would have even more value. So it's not a bad idea to recognize the success that's happened with Cascade and Maine and Adams and Hood and the new investment in all those properties and start to sunset it so we can recoup that revenue back into the general fund.
Do we have a document with all the projects that have been completed by the URA? Well, I think we already have that.
Yeah, it's in the report. It's actually on our website. We have to publish that every year.
Yeah.
It's
Really kind of cool to see how much has been done because
Cassian Avenue
what's been done wouldn't have been done without the URA. It just it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that was done in the past that was very thoughtful from prior staff.
And I think
councils.
the Cascade improvements
Cascade improvements is probably the
biggest-
big ones. There hasn't been anything substantial except for what's been done in probably the last 4 years.
Yeah.
We had like some facade grant reimbursements. That's another thing. You do a lot of reimbursement programs, trash enclosures. We had a program for that, where, hey, you put in a $1,000 trash enclosure, we'll reimburse you $500. Facade grants was similar.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
The URA did have a lull between like 2013 to 2020
Yeah,
except for those little things. Yeah.
right. Yeah, they did.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, you were on Budget Committee. Actually, the increment dipped down for a couple years,
did.
much to our chagrin. And then it came back, but yeah, that was kind of a whoa. But that was subsequent to the recession matter there.
Is there a plan to renew it after 2030? I mean, that's kind of coming up
Yeah.
soon in the life of the,
Oh, good question. I don't have the answer to that.
Council has a lot of discretion in that decision, right? So, or the URA
Yeah.
committee, I guess.
It takes a big effort. I think, like you said, you have to involve overlapping districts, and they have to realize what they're going to be foregoing, for how long, and then where do you do it? Do you kind of go over the same area? You have to have these goals in mind. And that is a great, deep policy discussion that
Yeah.
is not something that I know much about.
I think council, the current council, if I can speak to it, is pretty sure we're going to let this thing sunset, spend what we have, finish off some little projects at the end with the remnants of it, and let it go. And that way, the next councils or future councils can decide what's the next big step. And, some of us may be on those councils, some maybe not. It just depends. But I think it's kind of nice to let the tax increment catch up to them.
Yeah.
And get it back and actually see the investment that we've already done over the last 25 years and let everybody catch up and take a breath, and then you can start again as a community and get the conversation going. It's, okay, what's the next step for the next 30 years? And just let them, I mean, we could try and control it now if we wanted to, but I don't think there's any sense in doing it because it's a really big push.
Yeah. And a lot of those overlapping districts they're in financial need, so.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I
you're
think
right.
it's good to let them catch up
Let them
now
catch up and let them
and-
see that return, and then.
But right after that, the conversation's wide open, right? I mean, it'll depend on the community and the council of the time, I think. We're talking, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road. At least,
We have to decide.
it would take
Yeah.
a year or more.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think it has been brought up, Jordan brings it up occasionally when we're talking about URA, that, it's only 4 years away, and, so, but yeah, I mean, we haven't had a lot of discussion, though it has been put in front of us that, a decision needs to be made sooner than later.
yeah. When the UGB expands, that'll be a part of the discussion and goes, okay, what parts of that might we want in a future URA,
Yeah,
boundary?
you can revise the boundaries of an existing area or district, right? You can take properties out and add them. There's a certain cap, I think it's like 20% of
Land
the land within a city can't be more than 20% for urban renewal areas. But the process of forming a new area is a lot more stringent than it used to be with getting the overlapping tax districts to approve. And I can tell you fire districts do not like them, which, like every other local government in Oregon, we're all struggling for revenue, so it's understandable. But this is a tool that usually comes up when there is a project that is out there that's been identified, or blight, identify an area that is starting to stagnate, right? What happens if we lost a lot of industrial, and jobs and things like that? It's like, oh, we got a lot of vacant buildings, property values are low. What's a project that can spur this area? So I can see maybe in the future that something gets identified as, should we think about urban renewal, a new area to spur, growth and redevelopment in a certain area? But yeah, we haven't had any of those conversations, and that could be changing the boundary of the existing area or going through that effort of drawing a new boundary and saying, we want to do some tax increment, projects in that area.
The city of Hood River, I think, has 7.
yeah, they have-
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So there's, yeah,
one
they have
agency
7 URA districts.
Right.
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
They have 7 of them. So, because, they had like the waterfront, that's the newest one where they're redeveloping along the river right there and stuff. So
Yeah,
it was
Portland,
crazy when I went up there and
dozen.
for a conference,
Yeah.
Anyway, but that shows you how they can target, you can target an area, a URA specifically for like almost one project. That's how they've done it.
Ben has now done site-specific urban renewal areas for projects like affordable housing,
Yeah.
where they'll freeze the tax base for that parcel and the improvements are basically the tax increment to give them a tax abatement.
What were you going to say?
I was going to ask, well, I was thinking about things that cost money. And the city is paying for like defensible space for city buildings, like leading by example, but for other businesses or private buildings that are not new construction, that wouldn't be covered by that. Like, would that be something that would fit in this kind
Yep.
of work? And
Yeah, I mean, that's been one of the goals in the agency, yeah, for sure. Like in reimbursement,
yeah,
some of those reimbursement examples.
yeah. Where is
Yeah,
that?
building hardening.
Where is that in the budget?
I think that's in this one.
It's been a council goal.
Yeah.
Fire hardening downtown, it's been kind of just a one-line thing that I think we're trying to finally hope to get some more traction on maybe this year, but I don't know if there's anything that we specifically called out.
If we put in a placeholder, yeah, it's something that we're looking at for the next budget of, when you spin up a grant program, it probably goes into materials and services, right? It's not direct capital that we're capitalizing as an asset for the city, right? So it'd be like an incentive program like we do for Dark Skies now, where we're encouraging property owners to take out, bark mulch and replace it with rock mulch, right? Or tree removal, or, reimbursement or a grant for
Landscaping, if you need someone.
roofing, right?
Yeah.
Get the
Siding.
shake roof off,
Decks.
So that would be, we have to create a program first, right? What are the parameters, the application process, all
Yep.
that,
Right.
and then how much do we want to allocate for that?
Yeah, so there's the project agency to study and allocate funding for grants and incentives property owners, implement wildfire resiliency measures, and dark sky improvements, so.
It's a different type of blight, but I guess it's still blight, right?
Yeah, it's not
Keep your
exactly
town from
for
burning.
them, but like it would be bad for everybody if it burns.
And it increases value, right? You're talking about insurance has been a problem, right? For both residential and commercial, this could help, right? Keep our buildings
Yeah.
occupied and insured.
Okay, does anybody else have any lingering questions? Topics?
When's the proposed budget coming out?
No, I think we're just
The
gonna
draft.
change, we're just gonna find replace in this one,
Okay,
so.
just move all the numbers, copy and replace.
Our meeting's May 20? Yeah, so a week before that, you'll get a copy of it.
Yep. So again, thank you all for coming. If there's any kind of lingering questions, that you have, or you want to, come by City Hall for another meeting with me or staff or whomever, happy to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming.